Hello students, today we are going to study the first chapter of History, the French Revolution. The first topic is French society during the late 18th century. In 1774, Louis XVI of the Bourbon family of kings ascended the throne of France. He was 20 years old and married to the Austrian princess Maria Antoinette. Upon his succession, the new king found an empty treasury. Long years of war had drained the financial resources of France. Added to this was the cost of maintaining an extravagant court at Palace of Versailles. Under Louis XVI, France helped 13 American colonies to gain their independence from the common enemy, Britain. The war added more than a billion livres to our debt. Livre is a French currency. Lenders who gave the state credit now began to charge 10% interest on loans. To meet its regular expenses, the state was forced to increase taxes. Division of French society. French society was divided into three states during 18th century. First state, second state and third state. First state comprises of clergy, fathers, bishops. Second stage comprises of nobility, in which kings and ministers come. Third stage had peasants and artisans. Clergy comprises of 5% of total population. Nobility also comprises of 5% of total population. And third state comprises of 90% of total population. First state owned 30% of total land. Second state owned 30% of total land, whereas third state owned 40% of total land. Clergy collect taxes from third state, which is called tithe. Nobility collect tax taille from third state, whereas third state pay both the taxes to first state and second state. Clergy enjoyed privileges by birth. Nobility also enjoyed privileges by birth, whereas third state live in poverty. The struggle to survive. The population of France rose. This led to a rapid increase in the demand of food grains. Production of grains could not keep pace with the demand, so the price of bread rose rapidly. Most workers were employed as laborers at fixed wages. Their wages did not keep pace with the rise in prices, so the gap between the poor and the rich widened. Things became worse whenever drought or hail reduced the harvest. This led to a subsistence crisis. The 18th century witnessed the emergence of social groups termed the middle class, who were merchants, manufacturers, and professionals such as lawyers or administrative officials. They were educated and believed that no group in society should be privileged by birth. Rather, a person's social position must depend on his merit. These ideas envisaging a society based on freedom and equal laws and opportunities for all. Supported by philosophers such as John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Montesquieu proposed a division of power within the government between the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary. The ideas were discussed intensively and spread among people through books and newspapers. The news that Louis XVI planned to impose further taxes generated anger and protest against the system of privileges. The outbreak of the revolution. On 5 May 1789, Louis XVI called together an assembly of the States General to pass proposals for new taxes. A hall in Versailles was prepared to host the delegates. The first and second states sent 300 representatives each who were seated in rows, while the 600 members of the third state had to stand at the back. Peasants, artisans, and women were denied entry to the assembly. Voting had been conducted according to the principle that each state had one vote. But members of the third state demanded that each member would have one vote. When the king rejected this proposal, members of the third state walked out in protest. The representatives of the third state viewed themselves as spokesperson of the whole French nation. Incidents occurring in France. On 20 June 1789, third state representatives assembled in the hall of Versailles. They declared themselves a national assembly and swore not to disperse till they had drafted a constitution for France that would limit the powers of the monarch. They were led by Mirabeau, an Abbé says, who was a priest. While the rest of France seemed with turmoil, a severe winter had meant a bad harvest. The price of bread rose. Often bakers hoarded supplies. After spending hours in long queues, crowds of angry women stormed into the shops. The king ordered troops to move into Paris. On 14 July, the agitated crowd stormed and destroyed the Bastille. In the countrysides, rumor spread from village to village that the lords of the manor had hired bands of brigade to destroy the ripe crops. The peasants in several districts seized hawks and pitchforks and attacked Bastille fort. They looted, hoarded grain, and burned down documents. Louis XVI finally accorded recognition to the National Assembly and accepted that his powers would from now on to be checked by Constitution. The Assembly passed a decree abolishing the feudal system of abolitions and taxes. Tithes were abolished and lands owned by the church were confiscated. The next topic is France becomes a constitutional monarchy. The National Assembly completed the draft of the Constitution in 1791. Its main objectives were to limit the powers of the monarch. These powers were now separated and assigned to different institutions: the legislature, executive, and judiciary. This made France a constitutional monarchy. The power to make laws vested in the National Assembly, who were indirectly elected. Only men above 25 years of age who paid taxes equal to at least 3 days of a laborer's wage were given the status of active citizens. That is, they were entitled to vote. The remaining men and all women were classed as passive citizens. Rights were declared, such as the right to life, freedom of speech, equality before law, were established as natural and inalienable rights. They belong to each human being by birth. The duty of the state is to protect each citizen's natural rights. France abolishes monarchy and becomes a republic. Louis XVI entered into secret negotiations with the King of Prussia. Rulers of neighboring countries too were worried by the developments in France and made plans to send troops. Before this, National Assembly declared war against Prussia and Austria. Thousands of volunteers thronged to join the army as a war of the people against kings and aristocracies. The wars brought economic difficulties. Men were away fighting at the front. Women were earning a living and looking after their families. Large sections were convinced that the revolution had to be carried further, as the Constitution of 1791 gave political rights only to the richer sections of society. Political clubs became an important rallying point to discuss government policies and plan for their own forms of action. The most successful club was the Jacobin Club. The members belonged mainly to less prosperous sections of society. They included small shopkeepers, artisans, etc. The leader was Maximilian Robespierre. The Jacobins decided to start wearing the long striped trousers and red cap, which symbolizes liberty. On August 10, 1792, the Jacobins stormed the palace of the Tuileries, held the king as hostage. Later, the assembly voted to imprison the royal family. Elections were held, and all men of 21 years and above got the right to vote. The newly elected assembly was called the Convention. On 21 September 1792, it abolished the monarchy and declared France a republic, means government elected by the people. On 21 January 1793, Louis XVI was executed publicly on the charge of treason. Next topic is the Reign of Terror. From 1793 to 1794 is referred as the Reign of Terror. Robespierre followed a policy of severe control and punishment. He got his enemies and opponents arrested and imprisoned. If found guilty, they were guillotined. The guillotine is a device consisting of two poles and a blade with which a person is beheaded. He issued laws placing a maximum ceiling on wages and prices. Meat and bread were rationed. Peasants were forced to sell their crops at prices fixed by the government. The use of white, expensive flour was forbidden. All citizens were required to eat equality bread. Equality was also sought to be practiced through the forms of speech and address. Churches were shut down and buildings were converted into barracks or offices. Finally, in 1794, Robespierre was convicted by a court and sent to the guillotine. And the last topic of this chapter is a directory rules France. The fall of the Jacobin government allowed the wealthier middle classes to seize power. A new constitution was introduced which denied the vote to the non-propertied sections. It provided for two elected legislative councils which appointed a directory, an executive made up of 5 members. To safeguard against the concentration of power in one hand, the directors often clashed with the legislative councils, who then sought to dismiss them. The political instability of the Directory paved the way for the rise of a military dictator called Napoleon Bonaparte. I hope you have understood the chapter. We will continue this chapter in the next part. Thank you.